"You're too old for this stuff, Grandpa," the clerk laughed, pointing toward the exit. The other customers joined in, mocking the quiet 72-year-old man in the worn baseball cap. They had no idea they'd just humiliated a Medal of Honor recipient, but his brothers were about to remind them. From which city in the world are you watching this story today? If stories like this move you, consider subscribing to Hidden Heroes for more tales of respect, brotherhood, and the quiet strength of those who've served. The bell above the door chimed as Frank Morrison stepped into Patriot Arms, the largest gun shop in Jacksonville, Florida. At 72, he moved with the deliberate gait of a man whose body had endured decades of punishment, but whose spirit remained unbroken. His faded jeans and worn flannel shirt marked him as unremarkable to the casual observer, just another retiree browsing on a Tuesday afternoon. Behind the counter, Tyler Jenkins looked up from his phone, his expression shifting from boredom to barely concealed annoyance. At 25, Tyler had inherited his father's business, but none of his respect for veterans. To him, older customers meant slower sales and longer explanations about products they'd never understand. "Can I help you?" Tyler asked, his tone suggesting he'd rather not. Frank approached the display case containing precision rifles, his weathered hands clasped behind his back. "I'd like to look at that Remington 700, he said quietly, pointing to a hunting rifle, the one with the Leupold scope. Tyler followed his gaze and snorted. "That's a serious piece of equipment, old man. Runs about $3,000. You sure you wouldn't prefer something more manageable? We've got some nice 22s in the back." The condescension in his voice drew chuckles from two customers browsing ammunition nearby. Frank's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but he maintained his composure. "I've handled rifles before, son. The Remington will be fine." "I'm sure you have," Tyler replied, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Probably shot a few deer back in the day, right? But this isn't your grandfather's hunting rifle. This is precision equipment for serious marksmen." One of the customers, a middle-aged man in a polo shirt, decided to join the entertainment. "Give the old guy a break, Tyler. Maybe he wants to feel young again." Frank's gray eyes moved between the faces now focused on him, each wearing the same expression of amused superiority. He'd seen that look before, in the eyes of enemies who'd underestimated American resolve. The difference was, those enemies had learned their mistake. These people were about to. "I understand your concern," Frank said evenly, "but I assure you I'm quite familiar with precision shooting." Tyler exchanged a knowing glance with his customers before turning back to Frank. "Look, Grandpa, I'm trying to save you some embarrassment here. These rifles have serious recoil. At your age, you could seriously hurt yourself. Maybe try the antique store down the street. I hear they've got some nice muskets." The laughter that followed was louder this time, drawing attention from other customers throughout the store. Frank felt the familiar burn of injustice, the same feeling he'd experienced when politicians questioned military spending or when protesters spat on returning soldiers. But this was different. This was personal disrespect from the very people he'd spent his life protecting. "You know what?" Tyler continued, emboldened by his audience. "I don't think you understand what you're asking for. This rifle can reach out and touch someone at 800 yards. You probably can't even see that far without your bifocals." More laughter. Frank noticed that even the store's other employees had stopped what they were doing to watch the show. He could feel his blood pressure rising, decades of military discipline warring with the very human desire to educate these fools about exactly who they were addressing. "Perhaps you're right," Frank said quietly, his voice carrying an edge that made Tyler pause. "Perhaps I don't belong here." "Finally, some sense," Tyler replied, but something in Frank's tone made him slightly less confident. "Look, nothing personal, old man. It's just business. I can't have customers getting hurt with equipment they can't handle." Frank nodded slowly, his eyes moving across the faces of everyone who'd participated in his humiliation. He memorized each one, the way he'd once memorized enemy positions before calling in strikes. "Of course. Business." He turned toward the exit, his movements still deliberate but now carrying a different quality. The customers went back to their browsing, Tyler returned to his phone, and the store settled back into its normal rhythm. They thought the entertainment was over. They were wrong. 63 minutes later, Tyler was explaining the features of a Glock 17 to a young police officer when the rumble of multiple vehicles outside caught his attention. Through the store's front windows, he could see a convoy of black SUVs pulling into the parking lot with military precision. "What the hell?" Tyler muttered, moving toward the window. The vehicles disgorged their occupants in perfect synchronization. 12 men in full tactical gear emerged, their movements coordinated and purposeful. They wore no visible unit patches, no identifying marks except for the trident pins that marked them as Navy SEALs. Their weapons were holstered, their hands empty, but their presence radiated a lethality that made Tyler's mouth go dry. Leading them was a woman in her early 40s, her sandy hair pulled back in a tight bun beneath her tactical cap. Commander Sarah Mitchell had served under Frank Morrison for 3 tours, learning precision shooting and leadership from a man she considered the finest warrior she'd ever known. When Frank's call had come in, she'd assembled her team without question. The store fell silent as the SEALs entered, their footsteps echoing in the sudden hush. Customers froze mid-conversation, employees stopped pretending to work, and Tyler felt his knees begin to shake. These weren't weekend warriors or gun enthusiasts. These were apex predators, and they moved with the confidence of men and women who'd faced death and emerged victorious. Commander Mitchell approached the counter, her green eyes fixed on Tyler with laser intensity. "I'm looking for someone," she said, her voice calm but carrying absolute authority. "Older gentleman, gray hair, probably wearing a baseball cap. He would have been here about an hour ago." Tyler's voice cracked when he tried to respond. There was an old guy, but he left. I don't know what you want with him, but what exactly happened when he was here?" Mitchell interrupted, her tone dropping several degrees. The store was so quiet that Tyler could hear his own heartbeat. Every eye was on him, but none more intensely than those of the 12 operators who'd arranged themselves throughout the store with tactical precision. He glanced around desperately, hoping for support from the customers who'd laughed along with him earlier. They were all suddenly very interested in examining merchandise. "Nothing happened," Tyler stammered. "He wanted to look at a rifle, but I told him it might be too much for him to handle. I was just being responsible, you know? Safety first." One of the SEALs, a mountain of a man with arms crossed over his chest, spoke for the first time. Safety first. The way he said it made it sound like a foreign concept. Mitchell stepped closer to the counter. "Let me ask you something, son. Do you know what a Medal of Honor looks like?" Tyler shook his head, unable to find his voice. "It's a 5-pointed star suspended from a light blue ribbon," Mitchell continued. "Only 3,500 have ever been awarded. The man you turned away today has one. Do you know what he did to earn it?" More silence. Tyler was beginning to understand that he'd made a catastrophic error in judgment. "Operation Neptune's Fury, 1992, Mitchell continued, her voice carrying the reverence reserved for legends. Master Chief Frank Morrison led a 6-man SEAL team into a terrorist compound in Somalia. They were supposed to gather intelligence and extract. Instead, they found 47 American hostages. Tyler felt the blood drain from his face. The compound was surrounded by over 200 enemy fighters. Extraction was impossible. Air support was 30 minutes out. Master Chief Morrison made a decision. Mitchell paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. He sent his team out with the hostages and stayed behind to hold off 200 fighters with nothing but his rifle and his training. The store was so quiet that Tyler could hear the air conditioning cycling on. For 28 minutes, Master Chief Morrison held that position alone. When the air support finally arrived, they found 137 enemy KIA and Frank Morrison unconscious from blood loss, still at his post. Every single hostage survived. Tyler's legs felt like water. Around the store, customers who'd been laughing an hour ago now couldn't meet anyone's eyes. After he recovered, Mitchell continued, Master Chief Morrison continued serving for another 15 years. He trained 3 generations of SEALs, including most of the operators in this room. He's personally responsible for over 200 successful missions and has saved more American lives than you'll ever meet. The polo-shirted customer who'd made jokes earlier was now studying his shoes with intense concentration. But today, Mitchell's voice hardened. He was told by a punk kid that he was too old to handle a hunting rifle. He was mocked by people who've never heard a shot fired in anger. He was laughed at by customers who wouldn't last 5 minutes in the places he's bled. Tyler wanted to disappear. He wanted to crawl under the counter and hide until these terrifying people went away. But Mitchell wasn't finished. Master Chief Morrison called me from his car after he left here. Do you know what he said? She leaned forward, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. He said, Sarah, I think I'm getting too old. Maybe it's time to hang it up. The big SEAL with crossed arms uncrossed them, his hands clenching into fists. 30 years of service to this country, Mitchell continued. 30 years of placing himself between America and her enemies. And today, a gun store clerk made him doubt his worth. Tyler tried to speak, to apologize, to explain, but Mitchell held up a hand for silence. Here's what's going to happen, she said, her voice returning to command tone. You're going to call Master Chief Morrison. You're going to apologize. You're going to invite him back to your store, and you're going to sell him whatever rifle he wants at cost. Do you understand? Tyler nodded frantically. Furthermore, Mitchell continued, you're going to educate yourself about the people who've served this country. Because the next time you disrespect a veteran in my presence, this conversation will go very differently. One of the other SEALs stepped forward, removing something from his pocket. It was a photograph, slightly worn from years of carrying. This is Master Chief Morrison's SEAL team from 2003, he said, placing it on the counter. Half the men in this picture didn't make it home. The ones who did owe their lives to him. Tyler stared at the photograph, recognizing Frank's younger face among the group of serious-looking warriors. You mocked a legend today, the SEAL continued, a man who's forgotten more about warfare than you'll ever learn about selling guns. If I were you, I'd spend some time thinking about what kind of man you want to be. Commander Mitchell reached into her own pocket and withdrew a business card. Master Chief Morrison's phone number is on the back. You have 1 hour to call him. If you don't, we'll be back. And next time, we won't be nearly as polite. The SEALs began filing out as silently as they'd entered, their formation maintaining perfect discipline. At the door, Mitchell turned back one final time. One more thing, she said, addressing the entire store. Master Chief Morrison isn't too old for anything. He can still outshoot, outfight, and outthink every person in this room. The only thing he's too old for is putting up with disrespect from people who don't deserve to breathe the same air as him. The door chimed as it closed behind them, leaving the store in absolute silence. Tyler stared at the business card in his trembling hands, finally understanding the magnitude of his mistake. Around him, customers began quietly leaving, their earlier amusement replaced by shame. The employees busied themselves with suddenly urgent tasks, unwilling to meet Tyler's eyes. 45 minutes later, Tyler dialed the number with shaking fingers. When Frank answered, his voice was calm, measured, betraying no emotion. Master Chief Morrison? This is Tyler Jenkins from Patriot Arms. I owe you an apology, sir. A very sincere apology. There was a long pause before Frank responded. I appreciate that, son. Would you consider coming back to the store? There's a rifle I'd like to show you. No charge. Another pause. I'll think about it. Sir? For what it's worth, I learned something today. About respect, about service, about judging people without knowing their story. Those are valuable lessons, Frank said quietly. They took me 30 years to learn completely. When Frank Morrison returned to Patriot Arms the following week, he was greeted with the respect he'd always deserved. Tyler personally assisted him, his demeanor completely transformed. The Remington 700 was waiting, along with a heartfelt apology and a promise that no veteran would ever be disrespected in that store again. Frank purchased the rifle, not because he needed it, but because sometimes the greatest victories come from giving people the chance to do better. As he left the store, Tyler called after him. Master Chief, thank you for your service, and thank you for the second chance. Frank paused at the door, his hand on the handle. Son, respect isn't something you give to people because of what they've done. It's something you give because of who they are. Every person deserves dignity. I just happened to have some friends who reminded you of that. Sometimes the most powerful lessons come not from what we do, but from how we choose to respond when others fail to do what's right. Frank Morrison could have stayed angry, could have written off Tyler and his store forever. Instead, he chose to turn a moment of disrespect into an opportunity for growth. Have you ever witnessed someone being treated unfairly because of their age or appearance? Tell us in the comments below. And if stories like Frank Morrison's remind you that heroes walk among us every day, subscribe to Hidden Heroes for more tales of quiet courage and the brotherhood that never forgets. Because the next time you see someone who looks ordinary, remember that they might be carrying extraordinary stories. And they all deserve your respect, whether you know their history or not. This story is a work of fiction created to honor the spirit of service, sacrifice, and the quiet heroes who walk among us. Any resemblance to actual persons or events is purely coincidental.